Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 21, recorded February 2019. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan, we learn their story, and we try to figure out why we all love Star Trek so very much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 21. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com, that's email, or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. And if you want to leave us a voicemail, you may do that at our automated line at 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. Spoiler warning, people. As we record this, we are in the middle of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point may be discussed on this episode. You have been warned. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the seriously smart, singularly serious, yet scarcely surreptitious M5 Multitronic unit.
The M5 stands by.
M5, let's have the announcements.
Posted to the main screen.
We are part of the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network. Visit our website at tricordertransmissions.com and see all the other great shows on the network. We've got Disco Trek, we've got Trek Ranks, Queer Trek, Sober Trek, Shore Leave, Reading Trek, Politreks, Weekly Trek, and even more. So come on, visit us, and you'll find something you'll like. And if you do find something you like and you wish to support us, you may do that on Patreon at www.patreon.com/the-tricorder-transmissions. Support at any level will get you access to all kinds of special content, extended and uncut episodes, and that sort of thing. We recently added some tiers to our Patreon supporters, and one of the benefits for certain tiers is behind-the-scenes videos, and one video that I posted was the behind-the-scenes making of the quote-unquote Delta Quadrant Feast, where I cooked a bunch of recipes out of the Neelix cookbook. It was kind of a panic. What a wild evening it was. So anyway, you go check that out if you're a Patreon supporter at the Trillium D level or above. And so here is a great big thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. However, if Patreon is not for you, there are other ways to support this show and the network as well. Sharing the show on the social medias and giving us your reviews and ratings would be an excellent and admirable thing to do, and we'd appreciate it so very much. Alrighty then, let's talk about some Kobayashi Maru feedback. These are from episode 19 with Professor Mohammed Noor. Question 1, which of these is the more outrageous alien, the giant space amoeba from the original series or the SETI eels from Star Trek II? My guest had selected the giant space amoeba, and it turns out the amoeba encircled and ingested the eels by 71 to 29% in the Twitter poll. You're arranging a dinner for some Klingon friends. The main dish will be Rokeg blood pie. Which is the better side dish? Pipius claw with a Breguet lung? My guest said Breguet lung, but in an amazing and unprecedented result. This poll came out exactly 50-50, so no resolution here. We will have to consult the Klingon version of Emily Post for final adjudication. Choose your attire, Captain. Kirk's green wraparound tunic or the usual gold-green pullover. My guest said the gold-green pullover, and that won in 56 to 44%. Which disease is worse, the quickening disease from the Founders in the Gamma Quadrant or the Vidian phage in the Delta Quadrant? My guest chose the Vidian phage, and so did all of you by 77 to 23%. And finally, the last question, which is worse, getting sucked into the mirror universe or being assimilated by the Borg? Well, the Borg assimilated this poll by 88 to 12%, and my guest also selected that, so the Borg were the big winners in this question. As always, after each episode is released, I post these questions in Twitter, so follow me there on Trek Profiles, and you can have your say in this episode's questions. That's it for announcements. M5, start the show.
M5 will comply.
Her favorite captain is Captain Janeway. Her favorite aliens are the Andorians, but she most certainly does not have a favorite ship. She's from Columbus, Ohio, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Heather Kirby. Welcome, Heather, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Heather, are you a Star Trek fan?
I am most definitely a Star Trek fan.
When did you first realize you were a Star Trek fan?
I first started watching Star Trek when I was probably in grade school. I would say like 8 or 9 years old. My father, who is kind of where I get a lot of my TV taste from, introduced me to Star Trek The Next Generation. And so I was a huge fan of Picard and Dr. Crusher and all the different characters on the Next Generation. But kind of like growing up, I that was the show that he liked, so that's what we watched. I didn't really develop my own taste until I got a little older.
And so you watched TNG. That was your first Star Trek?
TNG was my first Star Trek, yes. I believe my first Star Trek movie I ever saw in the theater was I remember seeing Insurrection in the theater.
Was
But
that a blessing or a curse?
I mean, I was like a teenager, so it was okay. I don't remember seeing anything after that until the Kelvin movies came out. So I definitely didn't go see Nemesis, but it was okay.
All right, that's fair. So you watched TNG, and is that something you did with your dad?
That is something I did with my dad, yes. He he wasn't really a fan of DS9 or Voyager, so we didn't watch it at the time when it came out. I have since then gone back and watched everything. But I like to put it this way, like I always thought I was a Star Trek fan because I like TNG, but it wasn't until Discovery came out that I really wanted to explore all that Star Trek had to offer. And so after watching the first season of Discovery, I went back and watched everything.
Oh, so you are a completist as we sit here today and record this in February 2019.
I am almost a completist. There are two original series movies I haven't seen yet, 5 and 6.
Oh
But
my
other than
goodness!
that, I've seen everything else. Yes.
Oh, that you have to remedy that. I mean, if you're so close, and this isn't even on the merits of 5 or 6. I mean, you're so close to seeing it all. You gotta just take the plunge.
Yes. No, I'm definitely getting there. I had to go back through and watch because I actually watched Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home after seeing the Kelvin movie Into Darkness because I wanted to see how they related to one another because everybody said it was so much like The Wrath of Khan. So I went back and watched those three, and when I went to watch the original series movies, I was like, well, I just should start from the beginning because I never saw the first one and then watch 2, 3, and 4 over again before I watch 5 and 6. So I'm on 3.
So you've seen the animated series too, I imagine.
I have, yes.
Oh, that's great. So 50-foot Spock is beaming with pride that you have seen the animated series. And so when you're watching Discovery these days, are you watching it on your own or you're watching it in a group?
I'm watching it primarily on my own. I'm kind of a lone wolf, but that's why I've really taken to getting to know what I like to call the Trek family on Twitter. Because even though I watch it by myself, I know I can go on Twitter and talk to the friends that I've made about what I just watched, even though I
Yeah,
watched
I've been following you on Twitter for a long time, so I see that you have a lot to say about the episodes, and and I'll link up to your Twitter, and I'll put all that stuff in the show notes up on TrekProfiles.com. But I certainly see a lot of people carrying on. So I think it's interesting, though, that you talked about how Discovery sort of unlocked your fandom in a way. What was it really in season 1 that you felt made you want to really embrace Star Trek, even though you'd been watching it for such a long time?
I mean, it's really hard. It's hard to explain. There was just something about season 1 that it connected to me more. Like there are so many amazing characters in Discovery that I could relate to in one way or another, and like each character in their different way. So it was something I just really enjoyed seeing, and knowing that it was Star Trek and it was something that's part of the same universe that I watched back when I was young, it made me want to just sort of embrace it and embrace everything.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you've gotten bigger into the fandom as part of Discovery. You're living a very active Star Trek Twitter life in Star Trek Twitter, right? And we there's lots of different kinds of Twitters out there. I actually heard an interview with Jack Dorsey the other day. He's the CEO of Twitter, and he was talking about NBA Twitter. And there's like a very specific part of Twitter for basketball, and there's a very specific part of politics Twitter. And I guess we're all part of Star Trek Twitter. And if you do a good job of curating your feed, it's a pretty good place. But you can often end up getting into quite a sticky place if you deal with some of the negative Nellies out there. Have you had to deal with some of that?
I have. I was kind of at the beginning of January. I came up with a hashtag idea to help count down to season 2 of Discovery, which we called Countdown to 1701, since it premiered on January the 17th. And it really took off all over Twitter because the show's, whoever manages the show's Twitter decided that they were going to share my posts and help promote it. And so it just exploded everywhere, but it also attracted that portion that you mentioned of Twitter that really doesn't like Star Trek Discovery all that much. So I kind of take the stance that I prefer to remain positive when I'm talking about Star Trek, as much as there are so many wonderful discussions that can come up throughout the episodes, and I don't mind getting involved in things like that. And I think it's just the impact of social media in today's age that there's a small but very vocal portion that just spews negativity, and to the point of being rude and offensive a lot of times. And to me, it's better to, like, when I happen across those people or they happen across my feed, I would rather remove them from it than engage them, because I think engaging the negative people like that just gives them more power, and it's what they want. It's what they want to show that they've gotten under your skin, and I'd rather not show them that.
There's plenty of fans I've come across who refuse to pay the $6 a month, who admit that they would like to watch the show and are open to it. You know, they're not negative Nelly sort of haters, but they're just like, yeah, I refuse to pay.
Yeah.
And I think, there's all kinds of ways to watch the show legally and correctly that don't involve paying for it, right? I mean, there's viewing parties. I'm sure there's Star Trek fan clubs that are in many locations. I'm sure that there's opportunities to go in with a friend on an account, and I understand that there's financial implications for this, but I mean, $6 a month is not the biggest monthly fee in the world. And if you go in with a couple friends, it can be very reasonable, or go to a viewing party somewhere. So, I mean, I think if people want to watch it, they can. And I just find it weird that they won't make an effort yet consider themselves Star Trek fans. I haven't quite figured it out myself. I don't know. Have you run across these kinds of people?
I have, and I think it's one of those things that they're not sure, like, they want to watch it and they want to watch new Star Trek, but they're not quite sure if it's worth their money because they've never been in the position where they have to pay for it before. And I think once they watch it, they'll be more willing to pay for it because that's kind of what happened to me. Like, I'm a blue collar girl. I don't make a whole lot of money, but once I actually watched the first couple episodes, I was sold on the show, and I was willing to give them my $6 a month just to support the show.
I had a coworker who came up to me and was asking me about it because as we record this, there was an episode of Let's Make a Deal, a Star Trek themed episode that was on TV, and everybody at my work knew about it.
Yeah.
And so she came out, she's like, "Oh, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but I don't want to pay for all access." I said, "Well, you can sign up for the 1 month trial, and cancel and binge the whole thing from the first season and see if it's something you're interested in, and go." She's like, "Oh, but I'd forget to cancel, so I won't do it." I said, "Okay, You know, I don't know. I don't know what I can tell you. You know, maybe just go buy a CBS All Access gift card and use that to pay. So you can't, you know, if you want to buy it, and that way they won't be charging you for forever. You know, when the card runs out, you'll be done. I guess that's another option. But very, very strange. So, okay, do you collect anything Trek related?
You know, not currently. I've recently, over the past like just couple years, I started collecting those Funko Pop
Funko Pops.
figures, yeah. And I've amassed quite a collection, but I don't have any Trek ones yet. So my Trek collection is probably consists of fan sets pins, which I just started as well, because I think the fan sets pins are really cool and just very creative and unique and not that expensive. So it's not too bad of a collection. If I was going to start anything, it was going to start there.
Do you wear the pins, or do you display them, or do you just keep them in an album somewhere? What do you do with them?
I actually made my own display board for them. It is actually I got kind of crafty, which I was kind of proud of myself because I'm not really a crafty person. And I took a canvas, an art canvas, like you would paint canvas on.
Sure.
And then I took some like sort of galaxy print fabric and then just kind of stapled it over the canvas. So it has like a galaxy print in the background, and then I could pin the pins to the canvas.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you have those displayed at your place?
Yeah.
Nice. So you don't wear the pins?
You know, I probably would wear some of them if and when I go to a convention, but currently, no, I don't wear any of them.
Which one's your favorite?
My favorite is probably the one that says "We Are Starfleet."
Beautiful.
Because it just makes you feel like you're a part of it, you know?
Did that inspire the idea for the hashtag?
I think so. That hashtag wasn't actually me. That was another of the wonderful friends on Twitter. I believe it was Johnny who came up with the "We Are Starfleet" hashtag. But I think the pin came first, and it was inspired by Saru's line in season 1 where he says, "We are Starfleet."
Fantastic. Well, you got T-shirts too, I see, because it looked like you were wearing one.
Yes, this is my Pride T-shirt, my Discovery Pride with the Pride flag in the Delta.
Oh, that's great. So you got a bunch of Trek T-shirts, or just a couple?
I do have a bunch of Trek T-shirts. I've been collecting disco T-shirts. They definitely have me there on the marketing front. But I've always been one for nerdy T-shirts. So I see something and I'm like, oh, that's cute. Yeah, I will definitely wear it, and end up buying it.
Do you wear them out and about, or do you just keep them at home?
Oh no, I wear them everywhere.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was getting gas, and I was filling up my car at the gas station, and I was just pulling out, and I noticed this woman wearing a giant "Live Long and Prosper" T-shirt, and I was like, "Hey, live long and prosper!" And I, flung her the Vulcan salute, and then she realized I wasn't a weirdo, and she's like, "Awesome!" And she saluted me back.
Yeah.
Because when you just hear someone shouting at you, you don't know, and then you see the Vulcan salute, and you realize it's all okay. You ever done any cosplay at all?
I haven't, but I want to. So I have a couple different ideas for cosplay. I'm not one of those people who's very creative when it comes to cosplay. I think some of the creativity that goes into especially the more alien costumes and makeup and things like that are really awesome. There's some people that go all out, and as much as I think that would be really cool, like I want to dress up, but I would rather be a little bit more comfortable. So I'm like the person who sticks to like uniforms.
I'll just tell you a true thing. I cosplayed for the last few years, and depending on how you put together a cosplay, it can actually be a little bit more comfortable. So I had some uniforms that I wore, and I actually had the screen authentic boot.
Yeah.
To go along with it. And it has that Cuban heel. Do you know what I'm talking about? And
yeah.
That pointy heel. And those things are uncomfortable. I mean, oh my God, and when I wear my Followers of Lokai get up, which is the black and white, half black, half white from original series, I have I have a pair of Vans that I wear. It's like the most comfortable my feet have been the whole convention is when I'm wearing that. So, you can get creative with that. It's not always a matter of comfort versus cosplay. You got to do a little bit smart, I think. But I'll tell you, when it comes to makeup, I can only stand so many hours in that stuff. And I'm like, get me out of this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the type of person who wears makeup on a regular basis anyway, so I don't think I wouldn't be able to stand wearing makeup that long.
I had the most hilarious conversation. I got to tell you this. I was doing a thing for work, and at my work, they needed a professional headshot for a thing that we were doing, right? And I don't mean like something you do with your phone. I had to go to a studio and actually get a professional set of headshots done. And they have a makeup artist and they do all that. So they put all this makeup on me and all that. They do these headshots. And then as soon as the thing was over, I'm like, how do I get all this stuff off? And the makeup artist is looking at me like, you realize that everyone comes in here and like, especially the ladies, and they're just ecstatic that they're all made up, right? And they want to keep it on. And I'm like, get it off. How do I get it off? I don't even know what to do. Just tell me, And
Yeah.
it was a big shock. I was like, well, what do you want? I'm just not used to it. I couldn't take it. You ever been to a Star Trek convention?
I have been to conventions. I've never been to a Star Trek exclusive convention.
What's the first convention you ever been to? Fandom convention.
The first convention I've ever been to is the local one, which is run by Wizard World. So actually, the very first time I went, I was just out of college. And I actually went because my one friend, his one friend is a slightly amateur comic book artist and had a table set up at the convention. And so he had an extra wristband, which he offered to me. That's how I got it.
Nice.
Because I didn't have to pay for it. Yeah.
See what I'm saying? There's always a way, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's always a way.
Yeah. I mean, and then a few years later, I actually worked at the same convention as a volunteer. So I got in for free. And I had to do so many volunteer hours, but then you could spend the rest of the time like wandering around the convention floor. And then actually last year was the first time I actually had a ticket, but it was my 30th birthday. And my father for my birthday, got me a VIP pass to meet David Tennant.
Oh, nice.
So that was my first full-on guest experience. So my goal is to save up money and attend Star Trek Las Vegas in 2020. So not this year, because it does cost a lot. Even when you find ways, it costs a lot.
Yeah.
But I want to go and I want to do it right. And it's actually, STLV is always around my birthday because my birthday is in the beginning of August. Mm-hmm. So 2020 is my 33rd birthday, which 33 is actually my lucky number.
Oh, nice.
It was my favorite hockey player's number growing up. So it's always been my lucky number. So I figure if I'm going to do anything special for my 33rd birthday, I'm going to Star Trek Las Vegas.
Oh, that'll be great. Unfortunately, we won't have, if you're a hockey fan, we won't have hockey here, of course, in August. But if you ever come out, we do have a hockey team. So you can come see the Golden Knights.
I know. My one friend, my hockey fan friend, wants to come see the Golden Knights. So
I'm sorry for the sports ball diversion, but the one thing I will say for my tens of listeners is that if you ever get the chance to go see the Golden Knights at the T-Mobile Arena here in Vegas, it is an unbelievable event. Because, I don't care what sporting event you're having, if you're in Vegas, you're competing with all the Vegas shows and all the other Vegas entertainment. So you can't just have the game. You got to have all the other stuff. So they have like the drum line. They got the actual Golden Knight running around, and they do this ridiculous pre-show. I mean, and it is a party. So it's highly recommended. Okay. It seems that recently I've had a surprising amount of you showing up in my podcast feed, Heather. So I followed you on Twitter, and all of a sudden, this is the third Tricorder Transmissions show you've been on. So what made you suddenly decide to do a bunch of podcasting all of a sudden?
Well, I just started getting into listening to podcasts probably the summer of last year. It was never something I had ever dived into before. And one of the first ones I started listening to was Trek Ranks, hosted by the wonderful Mr. Jim Morehouse. And his podcast is especially designed for people to send in their own lists and interact with him. And he reached out to me initially.
Nice.
And that's how I got on my first podcast, because he reached out to me and he said, you know, you have such a positive voice and I think you would be wonderful as a guest on the podcast. And so that was my very first opportunity. And I think once I broke out of my shell and stepped out and did that, then I was a little bit more confident to reach out to other people and take other opportunities to be on a podcast. Because I'm not very, I'm kind of shy initially when and that's one of the things I love about Twitter. And you can kind of tell looking at my Twitter page, like my actual name isn't on it anywhere. About the only thing that's on it that relates to real life is the town that I live in, but my name's not on it. My age isn't on it. But I found that was easier for me to reach out and get to know people better without having my real self as the face of it, if that makes any kind of sense.
Sure, I understand. It was a persona that you wanted to exercise that had some importance to you in a certain part of your life, and it allowed you to do that. And I think it's a great thing about Twitter. If you do it right, it's a great way to interact with other fans.
Yeah, and I mean, now that I've gotten to know people and I've made friends, I mean, there's plenty of people on Twitter who know who I actually am and know my real name and know more about me, and there's plenty of people who have listened to the podcast I've done now who know my actual name and know a little bit more about me. So I think it was a way for me to kind of initially break through my shy facade, because I don't want to sit there and say I'm shy because I'm having this conversation with you right now. But it's like when I initially meet people, I'm really shy. And then once I get to know people better is when I open up better.
So I doubt that there's anyone who's listening to this who doesn't already listen to Trek Ranks. But in case there are some people out there who are in that situation, why don't you tell us which episode of Trek Ranks you appeared on and if you remember your list?
I believe it was episode 44, I think. It was the top 5 Voyager guilty pleasures, which was kind of exciting because Voyager was actually the last series that I finished. So it was very fresh in my mind to talk about Voyager. And like you said at the start of the podcast, Janeway is my favorite captain. So I do remember my list. I believe number 5 was Tattoo. Number 4 was Fury. Number 3 was... Oh, I can't remember the name of the actual episode now, but it was the one where you meet Flaughter in their little Storyland thing. Number 2 was Fairhaven, and number 1 was Sacred Ground.
Which one was Sacred Ground?
Sacred Ground was the one where Janeway had to go through, like...
Oh, wait, I remember that one. Yeah. She had to go through the religious temple to get Kess out.
Yes,
I just recently saw that one. Voyager was a series that I actually missed most of it when it was in first run because I was in the Navy at the time and I wasn't in a place where I could watch regular TV, appointment viewing, and I just never had a chance to get back to it. So I'm working my way through. So I am unfamiliar with most of those episodes except for Sacred Ground. So I haven't seen them. But the one thing I will say is just talking to fans, people seem to be really down on Voyager for some reason. And I thought season 1 of Voyager in particular was incredibly strong. And it was really great. I very much enjoyed it. And I put it right up there, I think, second only to TOS season 1, in my opinion. So, which might be controversial for some people, but I thought there were just so many wonderful episodes, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. So, what is it? What has been the benefit to you of doing this podcasting? What does it do for you when you get on Trek Ranks or being here on Trek Profiles, or you just did a disco trek with Heather, and that was with Heather and Alex, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does that do? Oh, and you just did a weekly trek too. My goodness, you're everywhere.
And
So
the funniest part was Alex was the other guest on my Trek Ranked episode too. So every tricorder show I've done has been with Alex Perry at some part.
well, not anymore. I can try to affect a horrible, refined British accent like Alex has if it makes you feel any better, but I fear that it would cause our friends across the pond to put me on some kind of list, and I'd be barred from entering the country for forever. All right, let's talk about some episodes then. So, as always, I had the M5 compile a dossier and put together some episodes for us to talk about. And the first one that it suggested we should talk about was Space Seed. Original series, season 1, episode 22. Ricardo Montalban as Khan, as the sleeping, escaped, genetically engineered supervillain or superhero, depending on what side you're on, I guess, and who's woken up by Captain Kirk and et al. On board the Enterprise and attempts to take over. Why do you think the M5 selected this episode for us to talk about?
I think the M5 wants me to tell you a little story about my history first before we talk about these episodes.
I'm game.
So I have a long history of growing up of dealing with various forms and amounts of bullying, and it is because I was born with a mild form of albinism, which, to anyone who doesn't know what that term is, it basically means that I don't produce the pigment melanin properly. My body doesn't produce it properly. Most people think of when they see an albino as someone who's completely white, and obviously I'm not, but I do have a paler skin tone, blonde hair, blue eyes. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize, that albinism causes something called nystagmus, which means that my eyes move back and forth uncontrollably. So when I was growing up, I got bullied a lot for being the girl with the crazy eyes. And it was kind of hard to deal with because you have people saying mean things about you over something that you very honestly don't have any control over.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I really connect to when it comes to Star Trek is the different characters who are pretty much human, but they're not exactly human. So they have genetic differences, like myself, that they really didn't have any control over. It wasn't their fault that their genes were altered that way.
Khan did not ask to be brewed up in a lab.
Exactly. He didn't ask for that. And he turns out to be something that's more of a tool to the people around him than his own actual person. But one of the great things about Space Seed is that even though Khan really does get treated decently by the crew of the Enterprise when he first awakes, like as much as they're suspicious of him and they're suspicious of his circumstances, he's not treated with outright hostility. But because, like, I think Khan's more paranoid than they are. And that's why...
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's why his ultimate reaction is, I'm going to take over this ship for myself. Because he doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust Kirk and the rest of them to actually help him out. And I think the resolution at the end of Space Seed is a really good resolution for the situation that they're in, because Kirk takes into account the fact that Khan, being the person that he is and being genetically enhanced, wouldn't really fit into society very well, to Federation society as it is now. And so it would be better in the long run to leave him on his own planet where he can make his own society, instead of the possibility of Khan escaping and trying to take over society.
Do you see Khan as a slightly sympathetic character, or do I mischaracterize it?
Oh no, I definitely, well, and it depends, because there's 3 different portrayals of Khan.
Well, specifically in Space Seed. We'll talk about some of the other ones in a bit, but specifically as far as this episode goes.
In Space Seed, I do see him as a slightly sympathetic character, yes. Because he's someone who is born out of consequence, and like I said, he didn't have any choice being made who he was. It wasn't his fault. He was constructed in a test tube to be powerful and stronger than your average human being. It wasn't his fault that he was given the qualities that he has. And so, as much as he is very much the antagonist, it's a matter of circumstance rather than actually being completely villainous. I don't see him as being completely villainous. Does he have issues? Yes. Should he not have done some of the things he did? Yes. But I don't see him completely as a villain.
What is your interpretation of the relationship between him and MacGyver's?
I think he uses her to his advantage, but also it wasn't that she was unwilling to be used that way. In her, he sees someone who's sympathetic to who he is. But her looking at him, he's unique. And he's someone that she wants to know more. And so they kind of, they see the differences in each other, and that's what attracts them to each other.
So it sounded like you wanted to make a contrast between Khan and Space Seed and some of the other portrayals of Khan that we've seen.
I do. To stick with the original series, I think the Khan that you see in Space Seed is drastically different from the Khan that you see in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
In what way?
He's a lot more harder. He's very much set on one goal, and it's not even a completely villainous or sociopathic goal. It's to take revenge on Kirk. And
he tasks me, right? That's what he says. He tasks me and I'll have him.
Yeah. So I mean, even, like, throughout that movie, like, as much as he does what he needs to take over the ship and to steal the Genesis device, the only thing that really matters to him is getting to Kirk. And as much as it's the same character and it's played by the same actor, it just comes off as drastically different from Space Seed. Because even once, like, Kirk foiled him in Space Seed, he was willing to accept what was given to him and just go on and deal with the situation that he had. And he could have done that in The Wrath of Khan. He could have taken the Genesis device and just said, okay, I have this device. I can go wreak havoc with it. I set out to get it. I can just forget about Kirk. But instead, he focuses on Kirk. And I'm not sure if they did that just because it made for a more dramatic story. But it just seems like a very different mindset to what he was in the original episode.
It seems to me that his mania extended even beyond Kirk, because when the Enterprise is in orbit around the Regula planetoid and being chased by Reliant, and they make for the Mutara Nebula, Khan is still trying to destroy the ship, even though he believes at the beginning that James T. Kirk is still buried under the planet.
Yeah.
He still wants to blow up the ship, even though Kirk isn't even on it. And then, of course, Kirk comes over the communications and starts mocking him. And, we know that Khan would just never have that. But his mania was certainly, he wanted complete victory, not just victory. He wanted total victory. Like, not only am I going to abandon that guy, I'm going to go destroy a ship too.
I think he connects the ship to Kirk as well. So as much as, well, and you think about it, like he wasn't certain that he was abandoned there because he thought his two puppets followed his orders and killed him. If I'm remembering that right.
No, because he orders Terrell to do it, and then Terrell kills himself. Chekhov passes out.
Oh, okay.
And then Kirk starts mocking Khan. And then Khan says, no, I'm going to leave you buried alive. And then Kirk does the famous Khan scream.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And then he just says, well, I'm going to leave you buried alive. And then he decides to take off after the Enterprise. Now, in my own head, if you want to make up your own story about it, he might destroy the Enterprise and then come back and tell Kirk he did it.
Yeah.
That I'd believe.
That I could believe too.
One part of Space Seed that's always stuck with me, and it's such a small moment, but I think it gives some insight into something that I think is quite interesting. And it's not from Khan's perspective, but it's from Kirk's perspective, in that they're sitting around in the little, I don't want to call it a court martial, but their little military hearing that they set up there.
Yeah.
And Kirk offers Khan the opportunity to go down to the planet. And Khan just says, have you ever read Milton? And Captain Kirk says, of course, I understand. And that's it. What kind of person has to have such an encyclopedic recall of a particular author that if you're in some scenario, I mean, I've read all of Shakespeare because I had a goal, like a life goal one year to read all of Shakespeare, right? And I read it twice, everything, every sonnet, every play. And I tried to do a serious study of it. And if I was just in a conversation and someone said, well, of course, you've read Shakespeare. And I'm like, yes, but how would I even know what they were referring to, right? And of course, the corpus is much bigger in that case. But I think it goes to show that Kirk in particular had to be incredibly literary and well-read just to know to what Khan was referring.
Yeah.
Because Milton's an author who's written a bunch of stuff. And it's like, well, I know instantly what part of it you're talking about, And there's another episode where someone makes reference to young James T. Kirk always carrying around a bunch of books. Now, you can make whatever sort of headcanon you want about the idea that, James T. Kirk was carrying around books, but I think he never got credit for the amount of education that he must have had to be able to understand exactly what Khan was referring to in that moment. I just thought it was a really nice, special moment that always sticks out to me when I watch that episode. I'm sure it maybe doesn't do that for other people, but it does for me.
No, it makes sense. And it really shows how the two of them had such a connection, because Kirk, being so well-read, I think he understood Khan a lot more than other people would, just because he understood what went into making him how he is.
Fair enough. And then there's a third incarnation of Khan in the Star Trek movies, in the JJ films. So I know we placed a marker earlier that we were going to talk about these. So I want to ask you just about some of the movies. This isn't from the M5 list. This is more off the cuff. But what was your opinion of how Khan was portrayed in Into Darkness?
Okay. To start out, I need to clarify that I'm actually a huge fan of the actor who portrays Khan in Into Darkness. I'm a huge fan of Benedict Cumberbatch.
Do you refer to yourself using the colloquial term?
I do not, because he hates it when fans call themselves that. And I don't want to call myself something that he hates. So I don't refer to myself using that.
We're going to leave that as an exercise to the listener if they want to look up what that is.
Yes. But I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding his casting due to the character originally not being white. And I just want to put it out there. I understand that. I understand the controversy around that. But I really enjoy his portrayal as Khan because, and it's not just because I'm a fan of him, the way Khan is portrayed in Into Darkness is, as much as I said, like, Space Seeds Khan was slightly sympathetic and I could understand where he was coming from, I think Into Darkness's Khan is 10 times more sympathetic to me because they really dive more into the background of how humans really use these genetically enhanced people that they created for their own reasons, and how they're used more as things rather than people. And I think Into Darkness' Khan really focused it a lot on that because Admiral Marcus comes off as more of a villain than Khan is to me in that movie. Just because he's the one who woke him up. He's the one who used his knowledge to create this ridiculously advanced ship and to create way more advanced weapons. And then he played his loyalty to the rest of his crew as a card to keep him working for him. And so he used his other really strong emotions as a poker chip, kind of, to keep him doing what he wanted him to do. But that in turn is what inflared Khan's anger towards him and towards pretty much most of the human race, because if one person was going to treat him like this 200 years later, what's to stop anyone else from doing it?
So I'm going to take a guess, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to take a guess that most Star Trek fans have probably seen the TOS movies and then saw the JJ films.
Yeah.
How did it affect you seeing the JJ films first and then going back and seeing these same sort of characters? They're not exactly the same, but the same sort of characters in a very different incarnation.
I think it really gave me a respect for the older characters, for the original characters. I'm not going to sit here and say the original series is my favorite series, because it's not. I mean, I'm in my 30s. There's just something about the original series that doesn't fully connect with me because I didn't grow up with it. But I have a respect for the original characters and the original show that they made and the original movies that they made and what they did with them during that time frame and how they really impact people. So I think seeing the JJ incarnations first made me respect the ones that came before them more.
We were talking earlier a little bit about the wonderful Jim Morehouse and his Trek Ranks podcast, and he recently released an episode that was the things you just can't get over. And one of the things I just couldn't get over was the destruction of the Enterprise in Star Trek 3. Someone tweeted at me and they said, well, they've destroyed a bunch of ships. You know, they've destroyed the Enterprise D. They destroyed all these other ships. Why is that such a big deal? And my thought about it was that, you know, the original Enterprise from the 60s, which in the movie Star Trek 1, where to take that, you know, they refit it and now it's the refit in the movies. That ship sat in my psyche for 20 years.
Yeah.
Just the idea of that ship had been sitting in my head for 20 years. And so the destruction of it hit me in a way that the destruction of the D, which never could. It just never could. Because the D was just, it was here and then it was gone. And it all happened very quick for me. Whereas, you know, there was a long time with nothing, with no Star Trek.
Yeah.
And, you know, we had the reruns and, you know, that ship was constantly in my head. And so it had an effect on me that I don't think could ever be matched, And so when I saw in what is it, Beyond, where they destroy the Enterprise again, I'm like, whatever, that was a cool effect, and it didn't even bother me at all. Whereas I'm still very emotional about the destruction of the Enterprise in Star Trek 3. I can barely watch the scene. And I think it's because it had that time to sit with me over all those years. And I at least that's the nearest I can figure out. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's something you emotionally connect to, because especially when you grow up with something and you fall in love, for lack of a better term, of something, and then you see it destroyed on screen, it's absolutely heartbreaking. So, but that's the thing with Star Trek, for it being around like 50 plus years, is that everyone has a different view of that. Like, I didn't grow up with the original Enterprise. I grew up with the Enterprise D and the Next Generation crew. So I will say, watching Generations and seeing the Enterprise D destroyed is definitely more heartbreaking to me, because that's the ship I watched as a child, and that's the one I grew up with. And yes, they have destroyed a lot of different ships. Like, I'm pretty certain in every single JJ movie, that Enterprise crashes. It has crashed in every single movie. And I'm like, please stop destroying the ship, because you're not allowed to. You can't fall in love with it when you see it crash and destroy in every single movie. Like, somebody's a horrible driver there. No. But yeah, it's just a matter of emotional connection. Like, I understand where you're coming from, because you're emotionally connected to that ship. So seeing it destroyed is going to hit you harder than seeing anything else.
I just want to place a marker here, which is that as we record this, we're currently in the first few episodes of season 2 of Discovery. And so we've had the short treks, and one of those was Calypso, where we see the Discovery in the far future.
Yes.
And I just want to speculate right now that if the writers decide they're going to blow up the Discovery, like at some point in some season, they're going to do it. And they are not going to be slightly, even in the slightest bit, held back because, like, oh, we can't destroy it because we saw it in Calypso, and they'll come up with some other idea, or work around that somehow. There is no guarantee that the Discovery is not going to get blown up real good, real soon in the show. And I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying that they will not be bound by that, that it's going to be around for 1,000 years or whatever I can't remember what the timeline was for Calypso, but it's way in the far future. So they're not going to be bound by that. And if they want to blow it up, they're going to blow it up real good.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to another episode that also features a genetically engineered superhuman. Dr. Bashir, I presume. This is Deep Space Nine from season 5. We got a couple of stories going on here. We've got Rom working up the courage to ask Lita out, which is sort of a B story here. We have Louis Zimmerman, the original model and programmer of the EMH, actually appears on the show. By the way, the first time that Zimmerman actually appears as a human.
Yes.
He appears in Voyager, but as a hologram of himself. Here he's the actual living, breathing person himself. And they decide that Julian is going to be the model for the next incarnation of medical holograms, and he reacts very negatively to this, and his parents show up, and a horrible secret comes out. So it seems that you have an interest in these episodes where the characters are genetically engineered. Is this related also to what we were talking about before with your mild albinism and all of that, or what's going on?
It does. It relates back to that, and that's probably why I told that story first, because all of these really relate to that. The main reason I wanted to talk about this episode and Dr. Bashir is that the first time I watched this, I was kind of put off by it on a very emotional level, because I felt like this was kind of an opportunity where they could take a character who was like Khan and make them a good guy. But it didn't really come off that way to me. And
okay. You don't feel that Julian is a good guy?
I I feel like Julian is a good guy, but I feel like they still treat him differently, especially after knowing his background and what happened. And I feel like Julian doesn't accept himself. He looks at himself differently because of this. And like one of the things that really gets me is the scene in the episode where he's talking to his parents, and he's very angry, and he's like, you know, I was like, you didn't give me a chance to be myself and to grow up, and I was just a failure to you, and that's why you did this. And it takes his mother looking at him to tell him, like, hey, you know, that's not why we did it. We just wanted the best for you, and we wanted you to succeed, and watching you struggle so hard and not being the same as everyone else. And that's, we didn't want you to struggle, and that's why we did it. And I guess you could say I related more to his mother in that instance than I did to Julian, because I understood where she was coming from. And I felt like this Julian's whole storyline was an opportunity to embrace how the concept of genetic enhancement or engineering in humans could be used for good, especially after they showed why it was bad in Khan, because there's, especially coming from someone like myself, where I at times had wished that someone could tweak my genes so I didn't look weird. So I felt like it was an opportunity that they missed out on, where they could have showed the positives and not just the negatives. And I understand partially why they did it, because it seems like they did it to show people that no matter how you're born, there's nothing wrong with that. But it comes off like, here we did this to improve him, and that's still bad. We did this to help him, and that's still bad.
I'm trying to think about how I want to phrase this. Have you ever seen or read the Lord of the Rings books?
Yes.
So I have recently been introducing my son to this, and he's 10. And we recently sat through the entire movie trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy as well, which should not have been a trilogy, but I digress. And we get to the end of the film when the Eagles show up and fly Frodo and Sam to safety. And my son says to me, Dad, why didn't they just do that from the beginning and say, get the ring on the Eagles, and they fly it to Mount Doom and sort of drop it in the volcano, and this whole movie could have been over, and it would have been so much easier.
Yeah.
And I had to explain to him that, I said, son, remember all those times where I help you with your homework, but I won't give you the answer? It's a little bit like that. You have to make the struggle yourself. I could do your homework way better than you could, way faster than you could, and get a better grade on it than you could, being only in 5th grade.
Yeah.
But that would profit you nothing. And so it's better for you to struggle with this and even get a little frustrated at times than it would be for me to help you. I think that it was very dangerous, I think, for the parents in that story to succumb. But I also, the more I thought about it, the more I thought about that genetic engineering kids in the Federation is probably a lot like plastic surgery in our world today. Like, they're all doing it, but no one admits to it.
Yeah.
I had the feeling that it's just not the thing they talk about, but they're all doing it. And even if they're not actively genetically engineering, they're not taking chances. Like they're saying, hey, let's go, we're going to be romantic partners. We're going to be married. Let's go get our DNA sequenced, and let's go figure out what our kids might be like. Because that technology certainly does exist in the Star Trek future. I had a lot of problems with how they resolved it.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine that they let Julian stay on.
Yeah.
I overlooked it because I knew they're not going to take him out of the show. So like the meta narrative of the whole thing sort of takes over and you realize they're not going to do that. But I just imagine though that every Federation school child in Federation elementary school is taught about the eugenics wars and how horrible it was and how it's the worst thing in the world. And, these evil super people tried to kill everyone and take over the world for themselves. And I imagine that set Julian up to hate himself.
Oh, yeah. It definitely did. But I find it interesting that it took 25 years till he finally had this, which I mean, yes, they did it for the TV show, but it took 25 years till he finally had this conversation with his parents in which he understood that he wasn't a failure to them. But yeah, it definitely, it set him up to hate himself. But there's also, one of the things that just bugs me about it in general, and not specifically this episode, is that, going forward, they just use, even in some regular DS9 episode going forward, there are moments where they point out the fact that he's different, and they don't come off very natural to me. They come off out of kind of almost like what happened with Khan, like they're exploiting the fact that he's different.
I really saw this episode an axis around which the character turned, in that we have sort of the early seasons of Julian where he's like this eager puppy dog, sort of yapping puppy type, especially in season 1 where he's, frankly, I found him annoying, and I know other people may not, but I found him basically insufferable. And especially with how he was going after Jadzia in the worst possible way. I mean, it was very cringy.
Yeah.
And then as right around this point, and I think we're in season 5 here, I think he became much more, I don't want to say withdrawn, but I would say much cooler, quote unquote. And I don't mean cool as in like Fonzie cool, hey, I'm cool, but I mean his whole persona got much more subdued, and he became a little bit more withdrawn in his way.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this episode as a big part of that character change. I mean, you see it, I think, most strongly in the episodes where he's dealing with the other genetically engineered people.
Yeah.
And he's got a very just, I don't want to say icy is the wrong word, but he just has a very subdued demeanor that was very, very different from early season Julian. And in my head, they connected over this idea that he was acknowledging finally who he was, and it changed how he acted, and I think Alexander, the actor, he took that and really used it in a lot of ways. And I know he wasn't a big fan of this whole genetically engineered thing, but I think it informed the way he acted as the character. I don't know. Did you see something like that, or am I off base here? I'm okay with being challenged on it.
No, I definitely agree with you. I mean, there's a definitive shift between the insufferable Julian because he really was insufferable to me in the first season or so, and the Julian that we see in the last couple seasons. And I do think it is related to that, but I also, I kind of, I don't know. To me personally, I see it as more of, I'm not quite sure which is the real Julian, because I kind of see it as more of being slightly more withdrawn because people know his secret now, rather than being acceptive of it.
So it was like a step back for the character in a way, right?
Yeah,
He felt
yeah,
like he couldn't be his authentic self, or what he tried to believe was his authentic self, because now he knows that he's a, this might be too strong a word, so forgive me, but a fraud, or not as advertised.
yeah.
So he's going to withdraw. Is that what you're telling me? Do I have that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and like I said, that's just my own personal take on it.
It's okay.
I can see how people can take that different ways, but yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about a Discovery episode. The way that I use the episode title is Si vis pacem blah blah Latin stuff. This is Discovery Season 1, Episode 8, where we go to planet Pavo. And here's where Saru encounters true peace for the first time in his life, and definitely takes a turn that I think took a lot of people by surprise. So tell me why this episode matters to you. I suspect it's not the Saru part. I suspect it's something else. Let's see if I'm right.
It's not the Saru part, and I hate talking about this episode because it's just one tiny scene in the entire episode that really stuck with me.
But that's okay. I think that's fine. In any episode that might be 45 minutes or, an hour or whatever it is, there's these moments that just stick with you. And I think that's part of the beauty of any well-made entertainment.
Yeah.
And if there's a scene that spoke to you, that can make the episode great. So tell us about it.
So the scene I'm referring to is when Tilly runs into Stamets in the mess hall, and she asks him what's going on with him, because he's going through a process after, in the end of episode 5, where he injected himself with tardigrade DNA. And so now Stamets is another genetically altered or enhanced character in the Star Trek universe. And he's going through a process of all these different things are happening to him due to his tardigrade genes that he now possesses. And he doesn't quite understand why.
And he won't go see Hugh Culber about it.
No, because once Tilly confronts him about it, and he tells her that he's about what's happening, and he's seeing visions, and he doesn't know if where he is at times, and she asks him if he's talked to Hugh about it, who is his partner and a doctor on the ship, and he goes no, because he wants to protect Hugh. He doesn't want Hugh to get in trouble because of the actions that he took in genetically engineering himself, because it's illegal. But one of the thing that really sticks out to me in this scene is how emotional you see Stamets. Like, you Anthony Rapp is such a brilliant actor, and you can see all over his face the emotions that aren't entirely spoken.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the fear and the worry and the confusion of just not understanding his character, not understanding his body and what's happening to him. And not only that, but the connection that he has with Tilly, where she just accepts it. She doesn't challenge him. She doesn't question him completely about what he's going through. She just says, we'll monitor this and we'll help you get through it. And it struck a chord with me, because when I was younger and getting picked on, and I hate to keep coming back to this, but
It's okay, Heather. It's okay.
I just wanted someone to accept me. I didn't want to feel different, and I wanted someone to accept me. And when I saw When I saw Tilly do that to Stamets, it made me connect with a character in a way that I've never felt before because I understood what he was going through.
Tilly or
in that
Stamets? Or both?
Mostly Stamets, but definitely both. I understood the fear and confusion that he had.
Yeah.
Just feeling different and not completely understanding why he felt different. And I understood Tilly just reaching out to him and accepting him. And it was a hugely powerful moment. Because one of the things I really love about Discovery is that even though a lot of these characters have such flaws to them, it doesn't matter. Their flaws don't matter because they're accepted no matter what.
I think that's...
And
go ahead.
No, that's about it. That just that it helps. It made me connect to a show in a way that I never had before.
I think that that's one of the beautiful things about Star Trek historically, not just Discovery, is that many fans, myself included, have seen things in the show, in the characters in the show, that really touched us in a deep and profound and very special way, that we wanted to be there. We wanted to be in that world where we can be ourselves, we can live our best lives, we can live the way we live and be who we are, however we were made, whether genetically engineered or otherwise, and have a life and be accepted. And in some cases, not all cases in Star Trek, depending on which version of it you look at, be celebrated for who we are. And it's a beautiful thing that doesn't happen in the real world. And so I think that anyone who listens to this would understand instinctively what you're talking about. I mean, what a beautiful idea that here's Stamets, who's suffering with what's going on, and he can't talk to the person that's most important to him in the world, but he talks to another friend, and she says, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not here to judge. I'm here to love, and let's get you sorted out, and let's get you the help that you need. And I think that there's a hunger in a lot of people to connect in that way. And it was a very beautiful moment. So I'd agree with you. Heather, you've shared a pretty moving story about that particular Discovery episode. So I want to ask you about another Discovery episode, and maybe they connect, maybe they don't. Let's see where we want to go with it. It's Vaulting Ambition, episode 12 of season 1. It's particularly noteworthy in that I thought that there was something wrong when I'd watched it because it was the shortest episode in Star Trek history, and it freaked me out that it wasn't even 40 minutes long. It was like 37 and a half or something like that. So tell me why the M5 thinks we should talk about this episode. Is this related to what we had just talked about with Stamets, or was there something else in this episode that was particularly meaningful to you?
It is related in a way, but I have an entirely different story about it. So one of the main scenes in this episode with Stamets is when he's caught in the mycelial network and he runs into Hugh, who's his partner who was murdered 2 episodes before that. And Hugh basically sits him down and convinces him that even though Stamets is comfortable here and is happy here being with his partner, that he needs to go back to his universe. And he needs to almost put his fear and his pain and his emotion aside and go back and help his crew. So I kind of had a moment like that myself when I was 14.
Okay.
I went on a 3-week trip to England, Ireland, and Wales with a bunch of other students. My one teacher, who I was very close with at the time, was one of the chaperones.
Okay.
And It was really my first time stepping out and doing something out of my comfort zone, because I grew up in a rural area of Pennsylvania. And I mean, I knew the people in my school, but I didn't really have a lot of social activities or really connected with people outside of that. And especially with dealing with people's reactions to meeting me and having to explain why my eyes look weird to everyone, I wasn't really open to meeting new people. But I ended up going on this trip because my teacher recommended it, or she basically sponsored me as a student to go on this trip. And the first week or so, I really kept to myself.
Sure.
And I stayed towards the front of the bus, and I sat near her because I was comfortable around her and I knew her. And then about a weekend, she and the other chaperone, which was ironically her best friend, but also another teacher at my school, they pulled me aside in their hotel room that night, and they basically sat me down and said, "Heather, you need to start opening up to people. We want you to get to know the other students that are on this trip. We want you to step out of your comfort zone and get to know people, and you'll understand that it's not scary and that there's a lot of good people here, and it will be better for you than just spending all of your time with us."
I imagine that caused you a lot of stress.
It did, but like watching that scene with Stamets and Hugh reminded me of that conversation, because had they not done that, I would have never, I would have just kept going the way I was going. And that was kind of the moment in my life where I needed to, I knew I needed to stop being afraid. And even though, like we talked about at the start of the show, that I'm really a shy person at first, and I still am a shy person, but I'm not completely closed off. I don't totally close off myself to getting to know people. I'm just very tentative when I get to know people. And before that conversation that I had with my teacher, I was closed off. I didn't want to get to know anyone at all because I was afraid of what they would say or what would happen when I did get to know people.
Sure.
And so it like I said, that moment again just reminded me of that conversation, because it's a breaking point for Stamets, for him to just open his eyes and go back to his regular life, even though it's really hard for him. And it was a breaking point for me to open myself and get to know people, even though it was really hard and really scary.
So it sounds like Stamets is a character in Discovery that's had a really profound effect on you.
He really has. And I like to say, because there's a lot of people who champion Stamets for being one of the first open LGBTQ characters in Star Trek, and I respect that. But like I said, I relate to him in an entirely different way, and it's amazing. It's
okay.
not. It's not something I've ever felt before, and I think it's awesome to have a character that's so well-rounded and complex that a variety of different people can relate to them in different ways.
I'm going to go pretty far afield here because I don't have any data on this, but it seems that Anthony Rapp is also very pale. Does he also have this same condition, or do you know?
You know, I looked that up myself because I was interested, because his Twitter handle is Albino Kid.
That's why I asked.
Which is apparently the name of his band too. But according to everything I found, he's not actually diagnosed with any form of albinism. So he's not diagnosed, but and I don't want to say that's I relate to him just because of his appearance too, because he is very pale and pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. But that does help, even though I don't want to sound incorrect if he actually is, because he
I understand.
might be. It's just not actually out there anywhere for me to find.
Right. It might not be something he talks about.
Yeah, exactly.
Or he may not have it. It just might be just how he is. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's why I really connect to him, because he looks like me as well. I don't know. I'd like to say that probably plays a part in it too, because
Sure.
seeing someone who has gone through things that you've gone through and they have the same appearance as you is really powerful. And people talk a lot now about how representation matters, how different people of color being represented in different films at a larger scale is really important for other people of color to see that. And I've never really related to that being a white Anglo-Saxon person. But seeing Stamets as a character on Discovery,
Mm-hmm.
I can better understand how that feels for someone who's a person of color to see someone like themselves on screen.
I think it's one of the strengths of all of Star Trek, going right back to the original show, is that people see these things in these characters that they deeply and very personally connect to in a very special way. And they want to be part of that world. They want to understand that character. They want more of that particular character. I mean, I think this goes right back to 1966 and Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. I'm reminded of a story I think I read. It might have been in the famous Stephen Whitfield book, The Making of Star Trek. That's irrelevant, but originally NBC wanted Mr. Spock in the background. They didn't want him featured. And all the fan mail started coming in about Mr. Spock and how people, especially women, identified with him. They wanted more of him. And they went to the show and they said, "Why is this guy in the background?" And they're like, "Because you told us to put him there." You know, we only very delicately brought him forward, and people really identified with him. And it might be because he was the marginalized one who was a few standard deviations away from the rest of the group. There's certainly other interpretations as well. But I think that there is a through line in all of the Star Trek series of those characters that are not quite in step with the rest of the characters in the show in some way. And people identify with that for sure. I mean, I know when I was a young kid, and there's a story I've never told about this, and I'm not going to get into it now, but when we see those things in Star Trek, we really latch onto them because they're so meaningful to us that other people may not ever know.
Yeah.
That they don't have the interior monologue about their life and their experiences to really access that connection. And that's what this is that you had some experiences in your life because of who you are and the experiences that you had that made you connect to that character, and it made it very special to you. And I think it's wonderful. It's something to be celebrated that you're able to bring those experiences to this and see something of yourself in the show. I think it's wonderful. And it's something to be happy about.
It definitely is. And I think it's one of the many reasons why Discovery really reconnected me to Star Trek.
Well, then let's take a turn and let's talk about a Voyager episode.
Yes.
Earlier in this recording, I was talking about how season 1 of Voyager, in my opinion, was very, very strong and is underrated, I think, by many fans. And one of the episodes that I think is a part of that was Faces, episode 14. This is the one where B'Elanna Torres is captured by the Vidians, who, of course, are suffering this horrible phage disease. And using some incredibly advanced genetic science, they separate B'Elanna into her human and her Klingon half. So tell me why the M5 thinks we should talk about this episode. I'm sensing a theme here with the genetic stuff, but I'm going to let you tell me.
Yeah, This episode really stuck out to me the first time I watched it because I think it's an incredibly powerful episode with a really good meaning and theme about acceptance and about accepting different areas of yourself. Because B'Elanna is a character who seems like she's always at war with herself because she doesn't like her Klingon side. And she really blames a lot of her Klingon characteristics on, if I try to word this right,
Well,
she
I think she blames her Klingon side for her dad leaving, which is something that, would be very tragic for any young kid to think that a parent left because of something that's in them.
Yeah, she blames her Klingon side for her dad leaving, and I think she blames her Klingon side for getting kicked out of Starfleet Academy
I think she
because
explicitly says that. Yeah,
yeah.
it's right out there. It's not a supposition. She, I think, pretty much says that in the episode, if I remember correctly. I did watch it in preparation for this, and that does seem to stick in my mind.
So I really love this episode because it's her human side and her Klingon side being able to actually have a conversation with each other. And ultimately, it shows how they work together well and how they support one another. And it starts out that the two of them are separated, and her human side doesn't really know what happened to her. She was just kind of thrown into the jail cell. But her Klingon side does, because the Vidians wanted her Klingon side to experiment on because it was resistant to the phage. So initially, when they're separated, her Klingon side is a very fierce warrior Klingon, but her human side is very timid and weak and scared.
She is.
And it takes her Klingon side basically saving her butt from some Vidians, and the two of them have a conversation with each other and realize that as much as her Klingon side is the strong one and the fierce one, her human side needs that support. And then the two of them work together to bring down the shields around the complex. And there's a lot of ways you could take that scene, like her human side is stronger and less scared because she learned from the Klingon side. But there's also, to me, it seems like her human side is stronger by knowing that her Klingon side is there and that her Klingon self has her back and will help protect her.
Well, for those who haven't seen the episode in a long time, I have to remind them that the Klingon side actually dies in the episode. The Klingon half takes a phaser right to the gut and dies.
Yeah. Well, and her Klingon half really sacrificed herself for her human half. And then at the end of the episode, there's a really powerful scene with her in sickbay in which she says, like, this is everything I always wanted, but part of me feels incomplete. Which I love that she said that, because it's like she's accepting the fact that she needs her Klingon self to be whole, and that her Klingon self is truly a part of her. But then the next line after that, it's like, well, I guess I'm stuck with constantly, or I forget exactly how it's worded, but she's like, I'm stuck with constantly fighting her for the rest of my life. And I guess I just have to accept that. I like to forget that line existed and just stick with the part how she felt incomplete without her Klingon side.
We can choose to overlook it because it's my show and we can do whatever we want. So I suggest we overlook it and we'll call it good.
Yeah.
I think that it's exactly an episode that teaches the beauty of synergy, right? Which is a hackneyed word, and I hate to use it, but I don't think there's a really good analog for it in English. And it's this idea that, that the two sides come together to make something that's greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes.
her two parts are necessary to make this wonderful B'Elanna that is capable of so much more than either part by itself could be capable of doing. And I think that's a beautiful message, and also I think of acceptance.
Yes.
It's a difficult thing. And I really enjoyed in this episode how B'Elanna got to that point to realizing that this is who I am. This is how I was made between my mother and my father. And I'm going to accept both parts and just move on and be awesome.
I think that's a journey a lot of people can relate to. And I think that's why this is a perfect episode to kind of wrap things up on, because it's really takes a lot of the facets of a lot of the things I was talking about from the other episodes. And ultimately it's about acceptance, just accepting who you are. So I think everyone goes through that journey of acceptance at some point in their lives. And it's something a lot of people can relate to.
Heather, why do you like Star Trek?
I like Star Trek. and this is really funny because I knew you were going to ask this question. And I think of different answers every time I think about the question. But ultimately, I like Star Trek because of acceptance. I think Star Trek is kind of the beacon of acceptance, even throughout the universe, the characters, and even the fan community. It's a lot about acceptance, and you can be different, and you can be weird, and people can look at you funny, but when it comes to Star Trek and other people who love Star Trek, you're accepted.
I think that's one of the things that I've learned by doing this show is that I have on all these different kinds of fans, and it's very important to me to have on a big diversity of fans. And I don't mean in those classic diversity terms, but I mean fans who have just a very different experience of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And to say that it's okay. It's okay to come on and say, there's this particular part of Enterprise that really speaks to me, and I'm an Enterprise fan because it touches something in me, and that's what I care about. And I don't like any of the other series. And I think that's okay. I think that's a very Star Trek thing to do. Yeah. And it's something that I try to do in my interactions with other fans. And it's one of the things that I've learned from the show and taken into my own life is, this is a very sort of Picard sort of thing, which is to take everybody as they come and where they are and not to be all judging McJudgerson about it. Which, Kirk was a little bit the opposite of that. He was a little bit judgy on things. Not to say I don't love Kirk, because I do, but he was much more judgy. And I appreciated and learned from a lot of the other captains to just relax and to take things as they come and to try to learn what I could from other people, even if their experiences and opinions were very different from my own, which, by the way, is something I feel that a lot of Star Trek fans have given up on.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with the haters.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's really a fine line between acceptance and understanding everyone's not going to like the same things that you do, and dealing with people who hate on the show. And so you really have to make sure you take your time, realize you don't cross over that line, because I think there's a lot of people who, especially being a big Discovery fan, there's a lot of people who really love Discovery and are very defensive of it because there's a lot of very negative haters out there.
Sure.
But then you get the people who are like, I love Star Trek, but Discovery is not my thing. And there are some Discovery fans who get very defensive with those people as well. And they, like, the one thing I want to say to anyone if they're listening to this is take a step back and don't be as bad as the haters. Just understand, be accepting that not everyone is going to like the show, but that doesn't mean that they hate it.
I think that there's not a more beautiful point to end this episode of the Trek Profiles podcast than on that one. Let's accept that other people might have different opinions. Let's accept that other people might like different things than we like. And let's just accept that and move on. But I have to tell you, Heather, that the M5 is furiously signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh, yay.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and cunning test prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Heather?
I am ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Heather's responses.
Simulation loaded for use.
Question 1. Who's more annoying, the Pakleds or the Wadi?
The Wadi.
You're serving dinner to some Starfleet friends. They've asked for adventurous cuisine. Should you serve Romulan vinarine or Cardassian Zabu stew?
Cardassian Zabu stew.
Choose your chariot to the stars, the Defiant or the Voyager.
The Voyager.
You've got a case of Andorian shingles. You can see Dr. Pulaski or Dr. Pollard. Who's it going to be?
Dr. Pulaski.
You're joining Starfleet. Choose your first assignment. Cataloging asteroids near the Goran border or charting gaseous anomalies near the Tholian border.
Gaseous anomalies.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
I gotta say, Heather, I'm shocked. I'm shocked you picked Dr. Pulaski over Dr. Pollard.
I am too, honestly. I almost went for it, and then I'm like, no, I know Pulaski's been around the block. I'm not. I love Dr. Pollard, but I'm not quite sure she's going to cure me yet.
Wow. Okay. And then you picked the Wadi as the more annoying over the Pakleds. Explain yourself.
I'm not a fan of board games.
That is totally okay. I just, what I really loved about that episode, Move Along Home, which gets a lot of hate in a lot of quarters, is because they're so excited to meet this alien race. And, I just I was, especially because it's so early in Deep Space Nine, I'm comparing it against TNG. Mm-hmm. And so I kept trying to compare like Cisco and Picard. And so, Picard would be all in his element as like a diplomat doing first contact. And here's these aliens, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to talk to you. I just want to play games. And Picard would just be like, really? And then they go to Quarks and end up wanting to have drinks and bang their wooden chopsticks together and play simulation, play video games. I just thought it was fantastic. Okay.
I think I'm definitely more Picard in that situation. I'd be like, what do you mean you want to go to the casino?
All right. Well, Heather, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Yay.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of the Trek Profiles podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Heather is awarded the title of Chief of Operations for Starfleet Shipyards, Utopia Planitia.
So there you go.
Oh, that's it. I'll take that. That's a pretty cool title.
Heather, please tell people how they can get in touch with you.
The easiest way to find me is on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @nerdygal33. Like I said, my lucky number is 33. And my Twitter name is Never Apologize for Being Nerdy, because frankly, that's something no one should ever apologize for.
Well said. Heather, thank you so much for being part of the Trek Profiles podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an awesome experience.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your considered feedback, angry diatribes, or Star Trek memes to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be sent as reading material to the giant 50-foot Spock on planet Phyllis. This week, I leave you with a quote from Paul Stamets, who in the episode Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad said, quote, "Never hide who you are. That's the only way relationships work," unquote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.